Well, welcome to the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors special board meeting of March 23rd, 2023. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
You want to do roll call first?
Oh, I guess.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance. Thank you. I have preempted the roll call, so roll call, please.
Directors Gunther, Akbari,
Here.
Huang, here, Weed,
Here.
and Sethi.
Director Gunther is on his way. I'll be here in a little bit. He's the vice president of the board, and when he arrives, he'll get the gavel. Director Sethi is on attending a district conference, water conferences, Association of California Water Agencies in Sacramento, as well as doing work with the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority. So at this time, we have public comments on matters which are related to the notice of the special meeting. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board on under public comments?
And Director Weed, as folks contemplate that question, maybe I'll just quickly do some housekeeping, make sure everybody knows how they can participate in the meeting. Just want to say good afternoon to everyone who's here and online. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this special meeting of the ACWD Board. My name is Ed Stevenson. I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and all related materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Also, just want to acknowledge we have a number of folks in the audience here and staff. We have a couple of special guest stars joining us today that Laura will more properly introduce, but I just wanted to say hello to Jennifer Pierre of State Water Contractors. Also, Erdem Abraham will be joining us from the Department of Water Resources. And here in person, we have Tom Francis from Bosca. So welcome, everybody.
Welcome. Do we have anyone serving this meeting online?
Marion, we do have, we have one staff person online.
One staff, all right, but no member of the public. So then I will close the public comment section and move on to the Water Resources Planning Workshop. It's item 4 on our agenda. Please.
All right, we'll just turn it quickly over to our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides, to get us started.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, members of the board and public, staff, and special guests. Thank you for joining today's Water Resources Planning Workshop. I'd also like to welcome our special guests today, Jennifer, Erdem, and Tom, and 2 of whom are joining us by Zoom. And I'd also like to introduce the staff that we have here today in support of today's presentations, including Stephanie Nevins, Megan Moreno, Giselle Delgadillo, and Kieran Kaur from our district's water use efficiency team. Thomas Neiser, Leonard Ash, and Russell Perry from the Water Supply and Planning team, and Michelle Walden here in the room, and Ava Laser online as part of our groundwater resources team. So next, actually, Marion, if we can jump into the presentation, that would be great. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So the current Water Resources Planning Workshop series is focused on planning for long-term management of the district's water resources as we face a number of future pressures and changes. Tonight's workshop is primarily intended to key in on our objective to update the board on topics that are critical to our long-term water supply planning activities. Next slide, please. Previous workshops and presentations in this series have covered a variety of topics as shown on this slide. And today we're at workshop number 3. Next slide, please. And we have a number of things on the agenda today, as you can see here on slide 5. And I will just dive right into what's next. So slide 6 includes a list of acronyms you may hear today for quick reference, just in case you need that. And next slide, please. Slide 7, today's purpose is really to begin laying the foundation for future water resources master plan discussions. We'll be focusing on the status of the State Water Project and South Bay Aqueduct, and we will check in on the district's water use efficiency master plan and the state's direction on the Making Conservation a California Way of Life regulations. We'll also wrap up with a short discussion on the timeline and approach for what's next, as well as some discussion on terminology for our future planning efforts. Next slide, please. So tonight I'm happy to introduce our first guest speaker, Jennifer Pierre, who serves as the General Manager for the State Water Contractors, a statewide nonprofit association of the public water agencies that contract with the Department of Water Resources to receive water from the State Water Project, which provides water to 27 million Californians and 750,000 acres of farmland. Jennifer is a UC Davis alum with a bachelor's in environmental biology and conservation and has 20 years of experience in Delta management and applies that experience to advance the State Water Contractor's primary purpose to improve water supply and operations for 2/3 of the entire state that depend on this water. Jennifer is a champion of collaboration and science-based decision-making, working towards solutions that meet the State Water Contractor's mission in an environmentally sustainable way. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Jennifer for her presentation.
Great, thank you. Let me get that up here and get to our slideshow. Oops. Thank you for having me today and for allowing me to participate via Zoom. Hope to be there in person one day. And thank you, Laura, for the nice introduction. I'm just going to jump right in about what's happening with the State Water Project and what's next. So just as a quick background, I'm sure many of you know this, but just to orient ourselves, this is a cartoon depiction of the State Water Project. We conserve water in Lake Oroville up here, and it's delivered down the Feather River to Sacramento River into the Delta. And then this is the South Bay Aqueduct that takes that water to Alameda County and other agencies in Northern California. And then from there, it moves farther south into the Central Coast branch over to Kern, East Branch, West Branch, and LA. But one thing that I just want to point out is that we have a huge number of storage facilities, pumping facilities, hydroelectric generation. So while we're very focused on oftentimes the Delta and on Oroville facilities, this is the largest state-owned water utility in the world. It's a very big facility and it's very important to the state and to each of the regions that it serves. In the Delta specifically, we have a number of important points. These are where the Banks pumping plant is, which is where we divert water from the South Delta. And then up here is where water is diverted from the North Delta. But overall, here's the map of the Delta, which is where your State Water Project, of course, comes from. Unfortunately, the Delta is not in a good state. I think environmentally and from a water supply, it's been continued to be a major challenge, and that challenge just continues to get harder and harder as the effects of climate change continue to increase and impact how we're able to operate in the Delta. DWR estimates that the reliability of the State Water Project will continue to drop over the next 20 years, and it already has dropped about 20%. This is due primarily to climate change impacts like sea level rise, temperature management that's required across the projects, other regulations that are occurring within the Delta itself. And we'll talk a little bit more later about Delta conveyance, but this is the reason for the Delta conveyance project, is to address these sorts of issues that are occurring in the Delta. In terms of water supply, this is a graphic that's showing you from 1995 until last year, water supplies from the State Water Project. Of course, we've just come out of a drought. And yes, I'm sick of the rain. I'm calling the drought over. We are in a water deficit. So I want to be clear about that. But in this year, we are in good position. So you can see that the last couple of years, pretty low allocations, but over the long term, also you see this decline looking at this yellow line. However, the state water project is really, really critical. We are delivering water to 27 million people and 750,000 acres of farmland. We serve many, many regions throughout the state, and I'll show you in a moment kind of how that water supply is distributed. But state water project, and we'll talk specifically too about your district, but this is supporting agencies throughout the state in order to do groundwater recharge, implement recycled water. You need something to start with to recycle water, banking water, and filling local storage. And that is something we're really seeing a lot of this year, right? With all of this water, we're seeing folks and agencies are able to really recharge their groundwater basins that had been tapped in the last few years, refill above ground storage, implement water banking, pull from water banks, and really move water around in a way that is a sustainable use of water. That comes from the state water project, especially when we have these really wet years. This is just showing you for context the statewide regional overview. You can see in the top left there in the South Bay area, about 33% of your supply overall. That includes Zone 7 and Santa Clara Valley Water District. And you specifically get about 40% of your supply from the state water project. But you can see across the regions that take water from the state water project, that it's about 30% of the water supply portfolio. So while nobody depends 100% on the state water project, it's a pretty critical component of almost all of California's supply. So like I said, 27 million people, or you can also calculate that as 1 in 12 Americans. When we look more specifically at Alameda County, like I said, it's about 40% of the water supplies. And you use that to do things like other agencies do, recharging your groundwater, making sure that you have a diversified portfolio. You're supporting the ability to not only recharge your groundwater basin for water supply, but also to ensure protection of sea water intrusion into groundwater basins. That's a very common thing for coastal communities to do. Also, because of the interconnection with the state water project, you and other agencies are able to bank water in other parts of our system. For example, you're banking water down in Kern County so that you can then call on that later. So that's a good storage technique. And just overall supporting all of your residents and businesses and industries that you have locally. And this is pretty similar for most of our agencies. And this is just showing a map of where all of the agencies are. So you can see that pretty much everybody but the San Francisco and East Bay and the Sierras and North Bay really receive some portion of their water from the state water project. So who are the state water contractors? My organization, we represent each of the public water agencies, including Alameda County Water District, who contract with the Department of Water Resources to participate in the state water project. The department owns the state water project and holds the water rights for the state water project, but we pay all of the water supply costs affiliated with we as in you and other agencies pay all of the costs associated with it. So we work very closely with the Department of Water Resources. Again, they are the owner and operator, but we have a obviously very keen interest in how it's operated, how it's being maintained, to ensure both public safety and water supply at an affordable cost. There are 29 public water agencies that contract with the department for participation in the state water project. 27 of those members are members of the state water contractors organization. The two that aren't, I'll go back one slide, are up here in the north, is Butte County and Plumas County. And the primary reason for that is that their issues tend to be very different than the issues for others that are diverting water from the Delta. And so there's not a good alignment necessarily for them to participate in the type of work that we do. And what do? We represent your interests as it relates to the state water project, your interest in all the other 26 public water agencies who participate in the state water project. We also fund a lot of research. We have a science budget of over $2 million annually, and this is above and beyond what the Department of Water Resources collects as part of the statement of charges for the state water project. Your agencies voluntarily pool their funding, and we implement a lot of science We are able to respond very quickly to scientific needs in the Delta and elsewhere. We recently just put out a solicitation for $3 million for RFPs for different science projects. And we're really excited about that. We're already seeing a lot of interest from the science community. And then we also work with other public water agencies and other state and federal agencies to advance various initiatives, the voluntary agreements being one. We work closely with a lot of other water agencies throughout the state and just ensure that the State Water Project and its values are known and protected. So what I want to get into today is really these 4 items. How do we make the most of the State Water Project as it is? What needs to be done to modernize and repair it? What sorts of investments can be needed and can be done? And then how do we stabilize our regulatory environment? And this is really the focus of all of the work that the state water contractors do. So in terms of making the most of the State Water Project, we have this facility. It's 60 years old. It does need some modernization, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But we need to be able to take advantage of the facilities that we have. And there's so much the State Water Project can do to really ensure statewide and regional and local water supply reliability. One of the things that we're working on is how to make permits more responsive. We have gone from what was a much calendar-based operational criteria. You know, on January 1, you operate like this, and then on January 30th, you stop operating like this and you operate like that. This was our kind of old permits. More recently, we've received permits that are more about hydrology. So maybe instead of saying on January 1, you do this, you might say when hydrology hits a certain target, we do this. So we're moving in that direction. What we'd like to see is even more so hydrology based and also fish presence based, which is really hard. But we're getting more and more technology to do that. So that's not to say that across the board, every criteria needs to be super, super flexible. But I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement to make sure that our permits can be responsive to both the whiplash that we see in our hydrology, as well as actual risk to fish, which is a big driver on our ability to operate the project. Another thing that we need to do is increase our storage. There's a lot of activity going on relative to that. There's obviously the governor's executive order that's allowing a lot of groundwater recharge across the state right now. Alameda County is, of course, investing in Los Vaqueros and other aspects of this, but this is something that as it relates especially to groundwater, we can be doing this in the very, very near term, and we can do it, so we should be doing it. And then lastly, using the existing infrastructure, implementing what we call the Water Management Tools Amendment. And this was an amendment that Alameda County Water District and DWR, and I believe all of the other state water contractors, if maybe there's a couple that haven't signed, can use to essentially transfer and exchange water within the State Water Project so that we can more easily meet the demands across the State Water Project service area. And that was a really important tool to define the rules and mechanisms for transfer and exchange approvals, and ensuring that we could be really efficient with how State Water Project water overall is being used. And that's been in place for about 2 years, and it was incredibly helpful during these dry conditions, and will be very helpful too as we manage through this wet period. So looking forward, we also need to make improvements to the State Water Project. Again, this is a 60-year-old facility. DWR does an excellent job with their asset management. They are very much planning and budgeting for appropriate prioritization of different maintenance projects. But the fact is that this project was constructed when we had a completely different hydrology. It was constructed when we used to have a snowpack that stayed cold and slowly melted and ran off into our reservoirs that we could capture in the spring, and then make releases from those reservoirs over the summer to meet demands throughout the state. We don't have that luxury anymore. We are going to see, as we have been seeing, dry, wet. We're going to be seeing more of our total water supply coming in the form of rain instead of snow. And we just don't have the reservoir capacity to really pick that up. So we do need to do a couple things. We need to make sure that when the water is available in the Delta, we're able to move it. And that's where the Delta Conveyance Project comes in. And then we need to make sure we have somewhere to store it. And that's where we should be looking at storage opportunities such as Los Vaqueros sites. I'm really big on groundwater storage in the San Joaquin Valley. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there for us to really integrate that more into the state water project operations. We also need to deal with aqueduct subsidence, and we're probably going to have some restrictions, not for you guys, but for the state water project this year, because the aqueduct's capacity has been reduced by the subsidence that has occurred throughout the Central Valley. And so when we do have these big wet years, we're not able to take as much water as is available because of that restricted capacity. And then of course, just overall asset management, just to make sure that this project just continues to operate as designed, and also as designed with these improvements and updates that we just discussed. We're making a lot of investments in science. Like I said, we just released an RFP. We have a lot of interest in the science community. We'll be issuing contracts on our board's approval for up to $3 million worth of science. We have a robust science program. We have annual reports that we do. The program is publicly out there with transparent management objectives and goals. We participate in a number of collaborative science forums, such as CSAMP and CAMP, IEP. We are always wanting to be at the table. We bring a lot to the table because we're able to both supplement the state and federal science programs, but also we're able to more easily issue contracts to really respond to scientific needs that are occurring. And through our participation in these groups, through the publishing of our science plan, through the robust RFP process for our science funding, we're really improving the transparency of what we're doing and really adding to the discussion around the science. And this is really important because a lot of the management decisions that are made about how to operate the state water project rely on data and synthesize science in order to inform different criteria that may be put in our permits. But also, at the end of the day, we need to understand when it's safe to divert water and when it's not, and under what conditions. And that's how we're going to really get to a place of having a reliable water supply combined with a healthy Delta ecosystem. And then lastly, we need to stabilize our regulatory environment. You may be aware that there's a lot of litigation right now affiliated with our current Endangered Species Act and California Endangered Species Act permits. We are also in the middle of updating the Water Quality Control Plan. And all of those open issues really create an instability in the regulatory environment, which impact how people make decisions about investments and in operations. And so it's to the system's overall benefit for us to stabilize that regulatory environment. And I'll talk about the voluntary agreement in a minute, because I think it's an important component of that stabilization relative to water supply. But relative to energy, this is another really big deal for the state water contractors. And one of the things that we've been working on is what we call an energy roadmap. So I'm going to get into each of these in a little bit detail now. So as it relates to the voluntary agreements, I think you're familiar with the general premise, but we are working on these. We signed a MOU with many other public water agencies, the California EPA, the California Natural Resources Agency, California Department of Water Resources, and Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Bureau of Reclamation. So we had a really robust support for this MOU, which allows us to advance the idea of the voluntary agreement. And basically this chart is showing a comparison between what had previously been proposed by the State Water Board staff and what's included in the governor's voluntary agreement, which he is promoting and we support. We'll be able to put new environmental flows in the system pretty much right away because it's a voluntary contribution of water from all of the different water users throughout the state. Over 85% of all water users in the state are participating in the voluntary agreement. And it does so in a way that combines that water contribution to the environment with restoration actions. We're very interested in that landscape water interface of how floodplains, for example, or tidal habitat are interfacing with those increased flows. And when we talk about flows on the voluntary agreement, we're talking about almost the same amount of water that would fill Folsom Lake. It's a huge amount of water that's being dedicated to the environment voluntarily so that we can get to work now instead of in a way that it is regulatory that will likely cause much more litigation that will take a very long time to resolve. And in the meantime, we're not solving the issue on either environmental needs or our increased understanding of how these flows need to be implemented to maximize their benefit. What the thing I'm most excited about within the voluntary agreement is the science and governance. We are setting a table to include as many people who are as interested to really talk about how to use this water and the funding we have for restoration to maximize the benefits across the watershed. It's an 8-year program, but so we have a lot of work to do, but there's so much we can learn by working together on this, coordinating different watersheds. You know, Oroville's going to make a release. Maybe Yuba can, piggyback on that. Same with McKellamie. So really creating a space where all the water users across the watershed are coordinating our operations, our science, our learning, our trade-offs. Those things are going to be invaluable as we move into even more climate change hydrology. We really are going to have to be in a position to be able to talk about trade-offs, think about them, evaluate them, and make decisions. And the voluntary agreement structure is meant to start to facilitate those sorts of conversations. And at the same time, again, this is a huge amount of water in the voluntary agreements, but it is also ensuring a water supply reliability because it's stabilizing our regulatory environment. In terms of kind of next steps, basically, we expect that the State Water Resources Control Board will evaluate the voluntary agreement as an alternative in their CEQA document. And that's called an SED, a substitute environmental document, but it's basically their EIR. And if they adopt that alternative, then it would become the updated water quality control plan. And because it includes how you would implement it, the voluntary agreement proposal includes who would be doing what, it allows for the board and us to implement the voluntary agreement right away, rather than going through a process of essentially assigning responsibility for implementation of a plan. It will require that we have different settlement agreements with the department and the State Water Resources Control Board to make sure that it's clear on who's doing what and when. And that'll be, many, many legal agreements across the watershed to make sure everyone does what they are supposed to do. So moving into stabilizing on the energy side of things, energy, not so much for Alameda, but for many of the contractors, is the fastest growing cost on the State Water project. And that's primarily due to the increased costs related to the transmission access charge, which is what PG&E and others are charging in order to access transmission lines. And you need the transmission lines to move energy around the state. So we are really looking for opportunities to identify and enhance public benefits. We are already providing a huge amount of public benefits. For example, when the Amber Alert went out back on September 6th and asked everyone to turn off their air conditioners and their lights, the State Water Project stepped up and basically addressed 20% of the deficit being projected that day. We have a huge role we can play because not only are we generating hydroelectric power, which can be done at any time of the day, even when solar's, starting to fade, but we use a lot of energy too to pump over the Tehachapi's. And so we have a lot of flexibility in the system to change not only our supply, but our demand. And we're interested in understanding that better so we can not only enhance that, but identify what those public benefits are and hope that we can also maybe receive some public dollars to help implement the types of energy projects that ultimately benefit not the state water contractors, but the overall grid. And so, but we'll always be doing that in the context of water delivery. That will always be the primary purpose of the State Water Project, but we're also very interested in being part of the solution. We think the State Water Project can be more than water delivery, and we're very open and interested in figuring out how to support the state's energy objectives. So before I go to questions and answers, I do want to just share, coming back to the Delta Conveyance Project, I didn't want to leave without kind of sharing this. This is a very quick 2-minute video that explains the project, and I'll share it now, and then we'll come back for questions and answers.
The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is the hub of California's water supply and a linchpin of California's state water project, where water from the Sierra Nevada
Oh,
mountains.
Jennifer, I think we're not seeing it on the screen here.
Oh, that's okay. Maybe I don't know how to, was it working when it was
Maybe
small?
exit.
Okay,
No, maybe exit the PowerPoint and click the link.
Okay, let me go to. Yeah, give me a second to get
Will you-
out of there. And I will go to my website. I don't think that worked. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's small, but we can see it.
Okay, what about this?
Perfect.
Okay, I'll start from the beginning. Sorry about that.
The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is the hub of California's water supply and a linchpin of California's state water project, where water from the Sierra Nevada mountains gathers to be delivered to 27 million people that rely on the water to run their homes, farms, and businesses. But the state water project's outdated infrastructure in the Delta is at serious risk from threats like sea level rise, earthquakes, and levee failures. As the state's rainfall increasingly comes in big flashy storms in between extended dry periods, we must invest in modern infrastructure that allows us to capture and store water when it's wet for use when it's not. Let's face it, our climate is changing and we need to change with it. That's why California needs a solution for modernizing the way we move water through the Delta. The status quo is simply no longer an option. The Delta Conveyance Project is not an alternative to developing more local sources of supplies. It is part of a broader solution and suite of actions that can and should be taken to maximize water use efficiency and help to ensure that the state water project can continue to meet California's needs into the future. California will always depend on water from the state water project. Without it, there is simply no way to replace the sheer volume of water our state needs. By adding new conveyance facilities, including a state-of-the-art single tunnel underneath the Delta to safely convey water through the system, the Delta Conveyance Project will bolster our resilience to climate change, support local water supplies, ensure the continued delivery of affordable clean water, and maintain California's economy. The question is not whether we should build a tunnel or not. It's whether we want California to have a functioning water system that can continue to meet our needs 10, 20, even 50 years from now. If we want our children and grandchildren to be able to enjoy the same economic opportunities and quality of life that we have, if we want to ensure we have the housing, schools, hospitals, and universities that continue to serve our growing population, California needs the Delta Conveyance Project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think we're happy to take any questions.
Jennifer, this is Director Gunther. I did arrive in the meeting. I had to drop out for a couple of minutes, so I did see quite a bit of your presentation. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, that's right. I am presiding. Director Weed.
Oh, thank you for the presentation. There's several, we're 1% of the state water project. So, but we have the good fortune of having seats on both either alternate or direct on the Delta Conveyance for both the finance, and I'm sitting on design construction authority as an alternate to Sarah Palmer. It's interesting to see how project, which is, as you pointed out, is reaching a point of its service life and is in need of a major, I'm using the term service life, is in need of a major retrofit, particularly the South Bay Aqueduct. So I'm open to any suggestions on how we accomplish that effort and get the necessary impetus to identify and address the problems with the South Bay Aqueduct. I'm also concerned with the vulnerability of the system as a whole. The subsidence on the main causing the need for the California Aqueduct itself to be in depression in some areas, reducing the flow. and the whole approach to what to do with the Delta. Dennis Herrera, who's general manager of the San Francisco PUC, has written a letter stating that the unimpaired flows are really an effort to transfer water rights and utilize the junior water rights use the senior water rights of TID, MID, and San Francisco to try and extend the life of the Delta in lieu of the federal and state water rights. And it's really not an issue of environmental. San Francisco has also pointed out that there has been no correlation between fish counts and flows for the past 25 plus years in the San Joaquin River. And in 2017, when we had maximum flows, the smelts population continued to decline. So the other aspect of this, is a conference we attended with Aqua about 4 years ago in Monterey, where a representative of the Water Resources Control Board said that they have only authority for flows, not to address the issues with voluntary agreements. And furthermore, they didn't have the staff to do anything other than regulate flows. So hopefully those issues will be addressed and as we go through the process. Thank you. Director Huang.
No questions. Just want to say thank you for a very informative presentation.
I'll echo Director Huang's comments. Thank you for a great presentation, but no questions from my end.
Okay, I'd just like to go on the record to you that, yes, I feel the State Water Project is very important to us. I fully support what we're trying to do up there with the tunnel, and I have previous to this project to the last one. I think it's very important for this district. We are involved in many projects that are associated with this. We've been doing water banking with Semi-Tropic now for multiple years. We know what it takes. We know what it could do. You hear about everybody talking about it. We've been doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There are issues, I think, that hopefully people will look at in the state and they won't, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to use it, screw it up. We've got the water banking started without the Sigma. It should work with Sigma. I think it will. And it has to. But I fully support what we're doing. I fully support what you're doing. And Godspeed for us. Thank you.
Thank you all for the support. And I'll just say that Laura provides incredible leadership within the state water contractors. She sits on our board, and it's a really great space for all of us to collaborate. So thank you for the continued support for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jennifer. We're gonna move on to our second speaker tonight. So I am happy to introduce our second guest, Erdem Abraham from the California Department of Water Resources Operations and Maintenance team. And he's based out of the Delta Field Division. So Erdem has been with the Field Division for the past 17 years and currently serves as the engineering branch manager, where he leads staff that are responsible to assess and evaluate assets at the Delta Field Division in civil, electrical, and mechanical fields. He has also led the South Bay Aqueduct Reliability Project since 2020. And so I believe Erdem is on here today, and I would be happy to turn the presentation over on the South Bay Aqueduct Reliability updates.
Thank you, Laura, for the nice introduction. And I also would like to thank the board for giving DWR this opportunity for DWR to come and provide a quick update in terms of what progress has been made over the last 2 years. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, you can see my screen.
Yes, we are seeing it.
Perfect, thank you. So today I will provide you a quick update in terms of South Bay reliability and some of the major accomplishments we've done over the last 2 years, and some of the current projects that we have ongoing for O&M at Delta Field Division. So I'll start with the power supply for South Bay system. DWR at Delta Field Division has 2 power sources that we get from PG&E. We have redundancy on the main power supply. It's a 230 kilovolt power that supplies banks. And from this 2 line, but the facility can run basically with 1 power supply, but we have redundancy on that system. And then we have a 230 kV bus that actually supplies power specifically just to South Bay. And from this 2 line, we have a step down transformers. Again, here we have 2 redundant transformers. South Bay can really run with just 1 transformer, but we do have a second backup power transformer, or if you want to take out 1 unit for service, we have that flexibility as well. So from this 2 transformer, the power runs through a 69 kV transmission line. Basically, we stepped it down from 230 to 69 kV. And then once it gets to the South Bay pumping plant, again, here we have a redundant transformer that steps down from 69 kV to 4160 that provides power supply to all the units here in South Bay pumping plant. Again, here we can run the entire facility with 1 transformer. The second transformer is always as a backup, or we can have half of the plant run through 1 transformer and the other half through the second transformer. This is just an example to show you when we had a refurbishment work done on the transformer, we had the second transformer providing power to all the South Bay units. We just wanted to provide a little bit more info in terms of power redundancy at the pumping plant. And then moving on to the units, the plant has 13 units to provide power, water supply to South Bay system. The collective capacity for all the units is about 511 cubic feet per second. The maximum design capacity for the pipeline system and the canal is about 380 CFS. We do have almost about 140 CFS spare. And then that was because Zone 7 was planning to construct a pumping plant by Dyer, and that did not happen. So we still have that additional CFS available for South Bay water contractors, but we can't push more than 380 CFS at this point. And then in addition to the spare units, we also have unassembled units that are actually ready to replace if any unit fails during the normal operation period. So we have about 3 units that are on standby, which are disassembled and are actually in a storage facility that we can put in service anytime. So this provides a little bit more information in terms of the flexibility we have in the pumping plant. And then moving on to the conveyance facilities, I know South Bay is constructed almost 60 years back, but we do have a good condition assessment program where we inspect the pipeline and then conduct aerial survey to ensure that construction development or private owners do not encroach into our facilities without proper permits or notification. Some of the issues that we have within our pipeline system, there is a thin layer, about 1/8 layer of lining that was actually applied in the pipeline that actually keeps the pipeline a lot smoother finish. That has been flaking off and has been actually collecting. You'll see it in this picture where you would have, about maybe less than a yard of material collect on some of the low spots that sometimes inhibit proper flow through the pipeline. And we typically go in and remove those material. Typically, what it does is it actually increases the coefficients of friction, and then flow through the pipeline is actually reduced by some number. And this typically affects the pipeline downstream of Bayside. And for example, for Santa Clara, the maximum design capacity is 184 CFS, but we cannot push 184 CFS because of this lining is actually a little bit rougher. So that's something that we continue to really continuously remove this material whenever we get an opportunity or when we do the condition assessment. The other issues that we typically have is sometimes a seismic or precipitation induced movement. This is again impacting majority of the Santa Clara pipeline, nothing on Valley Water or ACWD side. We don't have that much significant issues, but most of the Bayside, all the way to Santa Clara terminal tank, we have some dormant landslides. These are actually 3 dormant landslides that we're currently studying: milepost 36.3, milepost 37, and milepost 38. We're consistently putting in instrumentations to ensure this landslide is not active and moving. This drawing is showing an active landslide by a milepost 35.4. You can see this red circle right here, dotted circle line, that is actually active landslide that moved back in the late 90s. And then we have another bigger landslide that is actually not as active as the smaller one right here. And then we also have another landslide right in the center of our pipeline in South Bay. So again, this is on Santa Clara. Most of the landslides are actually located below Bayside Valve. But we continuously monitor this red line dotted. This red dotted points are actually instrumentation for real-time monitoring. It gives us good information as precipitation happens or seismic happens. We get a real-time data. This is one specific example for one of the instrumentation. Right after the December rainfall in January, we started seeing a little bit movement, and this is actually recorded in real time. And this was back in January 19th. We got a signal that the land actually moved, hillside actually moved about maybe quarter an inch. And then back in February 24th, we got another signal that it moved by another quarter inch. And typically our pipeline is actually showing here by blue, and then the instrumentation is letting us know that this is the one that actually moved. So this is something that we're actively monitoring on a real-time basis. This is just an example. Some of the key accomplishment that we've achieved in the last 2 years, especially on Bethany Dam, we had a series of burrowing animals that were creating a little bit of issues for us along the face of the dams. And some of the environmental challenges that we have in the state of California, we were not able to permanently remove the rodents from our face of the dams. So one of the measures that we've done was we've installed a steel wire mesh that is actually rubber coated. We removed about 2 feet of material from the face of the dam, applied this wire mesh so that squirrels or rodent burrow do not burrow into the face of the dam. And we armored the face of the dams. And finally, we were able to achieve a good protected dam so that, the burrowing does not occur in the face of the dam. The other issue was also on the aqueduct, especially when we had the drought and when we're not pushing a lot of water, and summertime when we have heat, we get a lot of algae bloom, and the aquatic weed actually prevent the screens that we have at check 2 and check 7. These are actually a transition location between the canal going into the pipeline. We typically have these 2 check structures where we have traveling screens. This traveling screen has a sprayer right here that you can see as the screen travels, it sprays and removes the attached or whatever is actually attached on the face of the screens. This was actually happening in 2021 during the high time season where we're actually wanting to push water, and then the screen gets plugged up between. We have two screens on each side of the check 2 and check 7, but it's a fine mesh where it plugs up the screen pretty bad, and a differential head is created, and we cannot push water through. And then it puts a little bit of pressure on the devices, on the chains and the motor, the bearings, and eventually a screen will fail. In that kind of situation, what we did was we put this metal gratings to take out the damaged screen, repair it, and put it back. But at that time, a lot of the vegetation and weed would go through the bars and eventually create a water quality issue for the water users. So in 2022, we were able to secure additional screens so that when we see this kind of situation, we would go in, remove the damaged screen, put the replacement screen. So this was something that we have achieved in 2020 to have a spare screen on site ready to go at any time for check 2 and check 7. The other significant change that we've done was on how Dyer was operated. Dyer, as you all know, water is actually transferred or conveyed from stage 3 only to Dyer. There's no interconnection between Dyer and the Dyer aqueduct system. This is Dyer reservoir, and then this water is actually only from stage 1 and stage 2. When stage 3 was constructed, water was delivered to Dyer, and then from here there was an outlet planned for zone 7. The future treatment plant was supposed to be constructed here and still not yet constructed. So what we've done at this point for Dyer operation is to cycle Dyer reservoir whenever the treatment plant reduces their flow by 15 CFS, 30 CFS, or 45 CFS. Instead of shutting the unit down, we are actually cycling from Dyer to help us alleviate the frequent start and stop of units. So this has actually improved the water quality at Dyer. We're cycling the water and brings the water quality to a better condition. The other achievement in 2022 was the asset management plan for South Bay was completed. The asset management plan has a 10-year inspection plan, and we've communicated this with all the 3 South Bay water contractors in terms of what the needs are, and the outage are actually developed and communicated so that we can do the needed and planned inspection for the next 10 years. And then also the asset management plan identified about 27 actions that need to be completed. These are some KPIs, key performance indicators that we need to develop so that we can meet our asset management goals. And then also the plan identified some critical spares that we should have on hand to restore the service in case if there's any failure of any parts. So this was actually communicated and discussed with the water contractors. Also, as part of the maintenance management system, DWR has acquired handheld tablets that staff actually use in the field. They use this to complete their work orders, tasks, and then document on site so that information is actually recorded on site instead of coming back to the office and completing it in their desktop. It also gives them the ability to access drawings and manuals. If they're in remote sites, it gives them the ability to access drawings on site. Also, Some of the staff are actually using them to communicate through Teams or Zoom between engineers and staff that are actually in the office. It provides them quick communication tool as well. The department in 2022 completed tagging a lot of the assets. Almost 4,700 assets were tagged between California Aqueduct, South Bay, and North Bay facilities. And staff can now scan and provide that information, or drawing could be looked into right away or on a manual for that particular devices. Current project and activities that are going on, especially upstream of Santa Clara pipeline. I know there's a lot of activity happening on Santa Clara pipeline because of the landslide and seismic induced movements. But a lot of the activities that are actually upstream of Bayside is in relation to automation of Del Valle pumping plant. As you all know, Del Valle pumping plant was the first and oldest pumping plant to be built right next to South Bay pumping plant. So it does need a lot of automation to have a little bit flexibility for O&M. Currently, we have to send an operator from Delta Field Division to ramp up a flow or reduce flow from the Del Valle pumping plant. So this is actually currently happening. We're on target to get this project completed within the next two years. The next is also automating the Bayside turnout, the Bayside valve. This is a 72-inch valve. And the criticality for this valve is if there's any pipeline failure in Santa Clara pipeline side, we have to ramp down all the flows for Valley Water as well as ACWD. And to minimize that, what we're trying to do is have a remote automated valve, a Bayside valve, and then at least does not impact Valley Water and ACWD and Zone 7 as we shut down Bayside valve remotely, because most of the time it takes almost 2 hours to shut down Bayside valve. By the time we travel, by the time we send somebody out there, close the valve, a lot of the properties may be getting damaged downstream in the Santa Clara pipeline side as well. So these are the major initiatives that we have upstream of Bayside valve. We have asset management that is actually moving in high gear. We have a lot of work that is happening in the pumping plant, but in terms of projects, these are the two projects that we're heavily working on in the last 2 years, and will be going on the next few years as well. That's all I have presentation to share. If there's any question, I'll open it up for questions.
How much money is programmed for the corrective actions you've identified in the most recent survey of the South Bay Aqueduct?
Are we talking about the landslides or?
Well, the total project, and then next follow-up question will be the allocation of those costs to each of the South Bay Aqueduct contractors. And is there a shared cost, or is it a dedicated cost to Santa Clara, to the Valley Water District, for the Valley Water District reach, where they're the only beneficiaries?
Yes, it is actually shared. It's not shared, anything that is upstream of Bayside, it would be shared for all. Anything downstream of Bayside, it would be Valley Water specific. It won't be shared. It would say if we do any work downstream of Zone 7, it would be shared by Valley Water and ACWD. Most of the work that we've done in the past few years was specifically for Valley Water. We've been having multiple leaks in a year for the last before 2020. Actually, we've been having multiple leaks in a year, and we wanted to minimize those unplanned outages. And the effort was spent last 2 years to really minimize those, and those costs were actually for Valley Water, and some of the work that we've done upstream were shared.
You have an estimate of what the total cost would be and what each share would be?
So far, we've spent about $9 million. That was since 2020. And share number, honestly, I have not looked up into the shares, but I can look it up and provide a little bit feedback.
Only 9 million so far, and was that primarily studies as opposed to doing actual work?
No, we've actually done work. We've installed Wico seals inside the pipeline. We've installed instrumentation, and then also we've done LiDAR studies to really pinpoint where the actual landslide are. We've done those work were completed. Asset management was a thorough review of the South Bay facilities from pumping plant all the way to the terminal tank at Valley Water. So those were activities that were completed.
You anticipate replacing those sections of pipeline that are being impacted by the movement of Mission Peak, which more than just the landslide, the whole mountainside is coming down?
Correct. So we did identify a couple of options. One of the option is actually avoiding the landslide and installing a new line outside the landslide zone. Correct.
And again, all right. Thank you.
So I do have a question regarding schedule. So under the asset management plan, you presented actual actions and inspection schedules. I'm pretty sure I'm just seeing a very small snapshot of the actions that you tend to take, but the few that's shown mostly has to do with studies. So is there actually a schedule of implementing the actions identified?
Correct. The one that I showed is the last on the slide, is the last portion of that table that asset management actually published. That was actually the few of the 27 on the end, but the first, I would say the first 15, 20 of them have a lot of actions that are actually currently happening on the asset management. The last few are for Division of Engineering that we are asking them to do studies. So in terms
Yes,
of,
I'm just, go ahead, sorry.
So some
I
of them-
guess I'm,
sorry.
A little delay.
all right, go ahead.
Yeah, so what happened was some of the critical spares that are identified as part of the asset management, we've actually started procuring some of those recommended parts. We're looking at some KPIs that asset management is already actually looking at. So a lot of things are actually moving, but the studies are for Division of Engineering and project geologists in terms of the landslide. So yes, it's actually already in plan. It's already in implementation phase.
Okay, that's actually good to know. I'm seeing it more from our customers' point of view. I do understand, for example, the Mission Peak landslide is south of our takeoff, but it's still within our service area and it will impact our customers, right? Any construction or, God forbid, failure or leak. So there's definitely interest, at least on my part, to get a schedule of when some of these recommendations, when would the recommendations come out in the studies and when would they be implemented? Would they be adhered to a schedule? Including
Correct.
the ones that impact us, such as the takeoff valve, of course.
Correct. So this July 2023, we plan to have a business case evaluation to implement out of those options. So Valley Water will definitely be part of that. And if ACWD is interested to be part of that decision-making, definitely will include ACWD in having that conversation, make the decisions to really select the best alternative this July. And then once we select, then engineering will come up with the schedule and cost. And then we plan to get most of this work completed before Anderson is back. And then when Anderson is actually back, then we can go ahead and set the line and make the connection. So we're looking at maybe at the most a 10-year plan to finish the construction and avoid some of those landslides.
So I'm just going to ask staff to monitor, because any construction within our district definitely does impact us one way or another. At minimum, there will be a customer relationship issue.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just keep track.
And I just thought I'd just add to what Erdem is saying. They do have a detailed schedule of all the elements in the asset management plan, and they share with us on a regular basis the status of each of the items. Also together with, funding risk, schedule risk on the individual items. And so they do a pretty good job of keeping us informed. And so, yeah, we will definitely keep our eye out for construction related activity and how that may impact, areas within our service area and our customer.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that's all of our questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Erdem, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, and the board may remember that Erdem was here a couple of years ago to talk about some of the long-term history of the aqueduct reliability efforts. So we really appreciate him joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, now we will transition to our next topic with some of our internal speakers here today. So we're going to jump in to talk about our water efficiency master plan and provide a status update today for the board. And this is a bit of a switching of gears. We hopefully you got a good sense of sort of what's the latest and greatest on the South Bay Aqueduct and the State Water Project and those fronts, so that we're prepared to jump into our future integrated water resources planning discussions with an understanding of where things lie on the State Water Project. But another piece of the puzzle that will fit into our long-term planning is the long-term water use efficiency regulations, how our master plan and various efforts have been going, and how that's going to all fit together for our long-term water use efficiency program. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Nevins, our water use efficiency supervisor, who's going to kick off this topic. We have a number of staff presenting tonight, and so they will be introducing each other as we voyage through the presentation. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Heides, members of the board. It's exciting to be here tonight. In fact, it's my 18-year anniversary at ACWD right now. I just realized that today.
Anniversary. What do I celebrate?
It's flown by, but I'm really excited about this update because this was a long time in the making, and we went through a big process a couple of years ago, and now we have a report on the progress so far. So initially, I'm just going to go through some background really quick. These were all presented previously, just to kind of get your memory going on what we did in the past. If you recall, this came out of the 2018 5-year strategic plan. In that, it was strategic goal number 2, sustainable, reliable, high quality water supply for district customers. There were several objectives in the plan that linked to the water efficiency master plan, promoting water conservation as a California way of life. This plan supports ACWD in meeting the state regulations, develop a plan to leverage AMI. It's part of the plan. It's also the first planning study as part of several studies, leading into several studies. One that we're going to be talking more about after this presentation, but we developed a water demand forecast as part of this process that fed into the urban water management plan. And then that will help support the 30-year water supply management master plan or IRP. Although we will have to revisit the demand forecast because a lot has happened in the last 2 years. The drought, and there will be, we hope, permanent reductions from the drought that will impact that demand forecast. And you may also recall that the board provided a lot of guidance on the measures or the programs. We, use those terms interchangeably, but really the measures are like a toilet rebate program or a weather-based irrigation controller program. So we asked the board to give us input on what were the top things we should consider when choosing measures. Cost effectiveness, just overall cost. Does it support our income qualify or low income or customers, or help with affordability, regional consistency, customer interest? Do they want to participate in these programs? Local control, and then again, the regulations, will help us meet those regulations? The board selected strategy B. There were 3 strategies, A, B, and C, and B was the one that was selected. It was it augmented our existing program. So it wasn't a big change to what we were doing now. We did drop one program, but measure, but then over time we were adding more measures into it. It meets all of the board priorities in the previous slide. And every measure that's part of it is, and a majority are well below the full cost of San Francisco supply in fiscal year 25-26, which is on the slide. The total number of measures in the plan are 16. And what we did was we put in measures that we thought would help us with the state regulations, even though they're still under development. Commercial, industrial, institutional programs or measures, and outdoor measures. There's been a lot of changes to the state regulations since then, and they have really honed in on indoor more than we expected. So that's another thing that we're going to need to look at when we do a revisiting of the demand forecast and the WEMP itself. But again, the water efficiency master plan was meant to be adaptively managed, flexible, taking this measure out, putting this other measure in. We have to be able to be nimble like that because the technology is improving all the time. Things are changing. We need to be ready to address it. But we do have this construct that we can work within that the board, you provided guidance for us on. All right, so now we're going to get to the 2-year results. So this first slide is some good points, I think, or points of interest on what we found when we ran the numbers through the DSS model. So the DSS model is the basis or the foundation for the analysis for the water efficiency master plan. And what's really exciting about this is that we can now get pretty good estimates for what we saved with conservation programs or water efficiency programs, whereas in the past, we have not had that ability. So it's still an estimate, but it's a pretty good estimate. We plug in the numbers of the activities that happened over the last 2 fiscal years, 2021 and 21-22, and we found that we saved probably of lifetime savings about 1,120 acre feet. That's lifetime savings. So a lot of these measures are permanent. That does not include any drought action over the last couple of years. This is just those activities from the measures that were in the water efficiency master plan. Of course, we had more participation that was fueled by the drought, but this is the measures in the water efficiency master plan. One thing that these numbers does not include is water use efficiency outreach, program outreach, and conservation outreach specific to the programs. We couldn't separate that out from the budget with the public affairs budget. We're going to look into that. Maybe we'll have something, we'll dial that in a little bit more in the future. but this is just for the measures that we could really get that information for. So 795,000 includes administrative costs that could be associated directly with these measures. $710 per acre foot saved. 12 measures were implemented. We have 4 more to go. There are 2 that weren't scheduled to be implemented until fiscal year 23-24. So those are coming up, AMI, that's the portal analysis. And then there's the other one was a residential outdoor survey program. So the 2 measures that were not yet implemented that were supposed to be implemented are a school building retrofit. And I'll get into more details on what happened with those, and then also the retrofit on resale was another measure that we had in there. So let's get on to the next slide. We'll show the comparison between what we had targeted or our goals for our water use efficiency program compared to what we did. So we're still within, we're actually below the cost per acre foot. We're about half the savings that we anticipated that we wanted. Again, our savings number in the previous slide, it doesn't capture everything. We have some work to do to hone that in a little bit more. And then the costs are substantially lower than what we estimated we would be spending. So again, it's not an apples to apples comparison. Like I mentioned, we don't have all of the savings that we achieved from water use efficiency measure specific outreach. We can't separate that out quite yet. And then another thing is that we had a measure that was, this residential indoor water surveys measure, it was not part of strategy B. It was not part of it because of the cost effectiveness of it. It's about $3,000, $3,200 per acre foot was what we estimated in the DSS model. However, we have that measure for some customers, like our Water Savings Assistance Partnership Program for our lower income customers. They can get a indoor water use efficiency survey, and it's folded into that. So it's cost effective for us because that does toilet installations and leak repair and the other measures. And then there's also the California Youth Energy Services Program that's going on in our service area that we partner with. We help them with outreach. We don't pay anything for that program, but we have a benefit from it. So it's part of the analysis of savings, but it wasn't in the original group of measures for strategy B. Again, school building retrofits, we had a pandemic, slow start to that measure. It's available to schools. We need to ramp up the outreach. And then fixture retrofit on resale. We've done a lot of research, but this may be something that will be driven by the state with these new regulations. So that's what's going on with where we are now compared to where we planned on being. We also had a drought, that took a lot of time and energy from our team. So running, the ordinance enforcement. So took away a little bit from the water efficiency master plan implementation, even though we still got savings from that effort. All right, so now we're going to go into some implementation details, summarize what happened over the last couple of fiscal years and some more detailed information about what the savings were for each measure. But I'm going to hand off the presentation to Giselle Delgadillo. She's our water use efficiency specialist right here, specialist 1. So come on up.
Thank you, Stephanie. So here you'll see the 12 active measures and their respective lifetime savings in acre feet. So you'll see that there are some of our popular rebate programs, such as the Water Efficient Landscape Rebate, and some other programs like our Income Qualified Water Savings Assistance Partnership Program. So the past couple of years have been quite busy. This slide shows some key program highlights from the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Staff adjusted all of our conservation programs to be able to continue to provide them to our customers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff also implemented new measures such as landscape contractor trainings and the Ratio Smart Sprinkler Controller rebate for our residential customers, and updated existing measures such as offering our landscape workshops online to accommodate restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of drought, a lot of drought work began to ramp up. So staff coordinated with our public affairs team to develop the One Saves Water campaign and develop specific resources for each customer type. Staff became heavily involved with the development of the AMI customer portal and closely monitored and participated in the development process for the state water use objectives. In 2020, the district was awarded the Environmental Protection Agency WaterSense Award for promotion of WaterSense labeled devices via our rebates and programs. And this slide highlights key initiatives that took place in fiscal year 2021 and 2022. So this year was very busy due to drought. We saw that customer inquiries and water waste reports were at 5 times pre-drought levels. Staff continue to implement new measures such as the irrigation hardware rebate program that we offer all customers, and continue to update existing measures to enhance them for drought. For example, we doubled the rebate for our turf removal rebate from $1 to $2 per square foot of lawn that was replaced with water efficient landscape. And we expanded the income qualified program to include leak repair measures. There was a lot of work related to the drought. We worked on developing the water shortage emergency ordinance that was adopted and held a number of drought update webinars for key stakeholders, such as city staff, to provide them information about the ordinance and the key restrictions that they would have to adhere to. We also held a number of trainings for internal district staff to make sure that everyone at the district had a basic understanding of the ordinance and the restrictions outlined. Staff continued to provide support to the AMI project with user experience testing, and continue to monitor the state water use objectives development. Some examples of key outreach that took place this year include that staff attended and supported over 10 community events as staff began to go to in-person events as some of the restrictions began to lift. And we also provided numerous community presentations to individual organizations to provide information about drought conditions and the different conservation resources that we offer our customers. For droughts, we also hired temporary assistants to help with all the increased customer inquiries and applications that received for our rebate programs. This year, staff also developed the scope for a water use efficiency programs tracking application. So in terms of next steps, staff will develop a water efficiency master plan 2-year public summary. And as mentioned, work to develop a method to track outreach costs and savings that are specific to water use efficiency efforts to have a more accurate cost and savings in future fiscal years. We'll also increase outreach for all measures and continue to develop measures that were delayed due to competing priorities with drought, and adaptively manage web measures as more information about the state regulations becomes available to ensure that our measures are helping the district move forward to meeting the water use objectives set by those regulations. And now to provide an update on the state regulations, I'll pass it on to Megan Marino, who's also a water use efficiency specialist.
And just a quick progress check. We have as we switch topics here, we have maybe 20 more minutes worth of subject matter to go through. It's about an hour and a half in. Just wanted to see if there's a need to take a break. It'd be a good time. Otherwise, staff's ready to power through.
Let's go with it.
All right.
Thank you. All right, so far today during this presentation, we've talked about what we've planned for during using the water efficiency master plan. what we've accomplished so far these past 2 fiscal years, and I'll be covering the state regulation update, which is one of the largest drivers of where we're going next, what's in the future beyond drought. As background, the legislation was passed in 2018, titled Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life under Governor Jerry Brown. Then it was DWR's responsibility to convene stakeholder work groups and work with stakeholders to provide a recommendation to the State Water Resource Control Board. ACWD staff was heavily involved, attended over 20 work group meetings. One component of the final standard was adopted via SB 1157, which passed the standard for indoor GPCD, or gallons per capita per day. And then another component was regulated into legislation, which was water loss, and that was adopted by the State Water Resource Control Board in October of 2022. So then finally, DWR had got a recommendation and submitted it to the State Water Resource Control Board in September and October of last year. Here's a bit of an overview as it stands now of the objective. The objective is made up of 4 individual components, but districts are not required to meet each component. It's an aggregate of all 4 components into your overall water use objective. The first was adopted via legislation, which is the indoor standard, starts at 55 gallons per capita per day in 2023. And I just looked it up last month, we're at 54.5 gallons per capita per day during the winter months. So we're hovering right around there to start. And then it ratchets down to 42 GPCD, which is very efficient indoor residential use by 2030. I should mention there's 2 other components of the objective that are not mentioned here, which is variances and recycled water bonuses, just because they're not applicable for ACWD. The second component of the water use objective is the outdoor residential use standard. And this is basically what an efficient outdoor lawn or garden would be using. So they're using an ET factor and multiplying that by the overall landscape area for residential customers in our service area. And to provide a little bit of detail about that ET factor, it's basically the higher the number it is, the higher water using plants and the inefficient irrigation. So it's basically it's a number that's a plant factor assigned. So high water using crops may have like a 1 or 0.8. And then it's divided by an irrigation efficiency factor, which is like drip is the most efficient. So it would be really low, but like overhead sprinkler sprays would be a higher value. So the higher water using plants and inefficient irrigation would be the higher number, closer to 0.8, which is where we're starting at. And then over time, if you have lower water use plants and really efficient irrigation, that ET factor is going to go down in volume. So without getting too much into the weeds, overall, what you can take away from that is starting in 2023, it's going to drop off over 30% by 2035 residential landscape water use with that ratcheting down of ET factor. The next component I'd like to talk about is not just based on water use. There is some performance measures nestled in there, but for the water use portion, it does use the same outdoor ET factors, but it does ratchet down even further in 2035. And this is all for commercial, industrial, and institutional landscaping. So like businesses, landscaping. In addition to that water budget, we're asked to classify all of our CII customers into 18 different categories, as well as provide them with water use sufficiency audits and water management plans. One other component of that standard is that any water user using greater than 500,000 gallons of water per year is subject to, on their landscape, is subject to change their mixed use meter to a dedicated landscape meter. Now you'll see a typo on the slide there because the initial report that the State Water Resource Control Board came out with did say greater than 500 million gallons of water, but our very astute water conservation supervisor caught the typo and conveyed it to the board. And they did confirm that they're looking for landscape water use over 500,000 gallons. All right, the final component is the water loss standard, which was also part of a separate rulemaking, but we'll add water use to the objective by taking the gallons per connection per day by our service lines. So this is where it stands as of now. This is DWR's recommendation as well as State Water Board changes, but this is completely in flux until the regulation is final, just because the State Water Board can tweak any of these. So they held their first workshop yesterday, and as far as implementation going forward, they are expected to adopt a rulemaking in fall of 2023. The following year in January, we will be calculating our water use objective. And in 2027, we'll need to actually meet that water use objective. Later that year in 2027, if we don't meet that objective, we are subject to written notices, conservation orders, and potentially fines. This slide is really just to highlight ACWD has been heavily involved in this process over the several years that it's been going on. We've participated in several different aqua working groups and provided comment letters, written and oral. We've participated in CUA's Water Use Efficiency Committee meetings, as well as worked with the California Data Collaborative and other agencies, including BOSCA. So will we meet this water use objective? Using DWR's recommended standards, we did an analysis and found that we would not be in compliance with our water use objective in 2030. Now, the State Water Board had made changes to that initial recommendation. So the past few days, we've been working to model what our standard would look like and if we would achieve that. And using the proposal as it is now, we also found that we would be not meeting our objective in 2030, and we would continue to not meet that objective in 2035. This analysis was done based on the most recent demand forecast, which, as Stephanie mentioned, needs to be updated to account for factors such as drought and permanent water savings and changes in population. So we're hopeful that that may change the impact, but right now that's our initial understanding. So, yeah. Finally, I just wanted to highlight this is not the only emerging piece of legislation that's ongoing for conservation. There was another bill introduced related to banning permanently the irrigation of non-functional turf. And we'll have to see what happens with drought prohibitions and if any of those requirements become permanent. So I'll invite Stephanie back up to field questions, but we're all happy to answer any questions that you have related to this.
You used the term, ready for questions? Okay. You used the term lifetime. How many years is a lifetime?
Well, some measures are permanent. The savings is permanent, but our lifetime savings goes out to 2050.
25 years.
Yeah, 2050.
Okay, so we're talking then at that area of about 50 acre feet per year is the savings of 1,120 over 25 years. So, and we sell about 3,000 acre feet a year. So it's about 1.5% of our total water sales. Thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation, and it's actually really nice to see projected savings and that we're actually doing better than projected in terms of cost per acre feet. saved, right? That is cost we could avoid regardless what percentage of our overall water supply that we're saving, right? We look at it on individual per acre feet basis, we're coming out ahead. So thank you very much for a lot of work, a lot of analysis. So good to see the update and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions on the content, more just some comments. Firstly, I know the amount of work that goes into this, and so it's very much appreciated. And I think when we get to reflect on these savings and look at the metrics of what we've been able to accomplish, it's quite a bit. My only comment, sitting on the LICA committee, we talk a lot about more information that we want to put out to the public, especially utilizing our social media. And I think there were a lot of metrics, particularly in Giselle's presentation, that I think would be great for us to put out into the public and highlight a good news story for our customers. And so I would just encourage us to try and do that and see what we can do on the social media side to start to paint a picture for what we've been able to accomplish, but then also use that to encourage more of our customers to utilize some of these programs and practices.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually have a couple comments / questions. First thing, retrofit for resale. I just want to let you know, I'm not a big fan. Not a big fan. I see this coming. I would not be surprised and probably willing to bet a paycheck that we'll see this. One only has to look at the natural gas restrictions, water heaters, stoves, and other items that they seem to like to pick on at the state level and tell the residents of the state what to do. Seems like our state legislature and the departments up there are loving telling us what to do. However, all that said, we're doing a good job, and sometimes we're the ones that have to tell people what to do, and I hope that we do a better job than they do. But I also see that I think, personally, I really do believe, and I don't really see this in their studies or whatever, that AMI is going to be our biggest resource here. I mean, based on just what little I've seen so far, and I don't know, and this question I'm going to go to you. Have you seen much of an uptick, or do we even track whether it's an uptick in people contacting us based on what they found from their meter? Because if that's truly the case, the state should be concentrating not on retrofitting houses, but on ensuring that everybody fires up AMI systems so we can track this. I really truly feel that's where the big buck is going to be gained here. That's where we're going to get our water loss uses. In addition to that, I wonder, is that even included in our needs for 2030? I don't think so. I'm not sure. Maybe it is. Thomas is shaking his head up and down saying yes. I really think we're going to see a very good benefit there. Now, after they're installed and people fix the leaks and we get that, well, then things are going to settle back down again. But I know some of us don't agree with my opinion, but maybe timing of our opinions. But I truly feel that this is going to happen. I think we're seeing results. And I'm curious if we're tracking those results, specifically questions coming in regarding maybe possible leaks. That's what I had to say. Thank you. So good work. Keep it up. It's not going to get easier. Guarantee that.
We are starting to track that. We have about 25% of the meters are installed, and we're working on that. So, and we did include AMI in the water efficiency master plan for the projected savings. We were conservative in our calculations.
Okay, thank you.
Might be a good opportunity to just check for any questions from members of the public. Online, we have a member of staff, but we also have a member of the public that's joined too.
Questions up to now from our member of the public? I see Mr. Nishimara has just joined us a short while back. Hearing none.
Okay.
Okay. Next up.
Okay.
Thank you.
You.
Well, thank you. Next slide, if we could. Marion, thank you so much. Okay, so this last bit is fairly short, but we did want to start to dip our toe in the water here and talking about our planning process and future IRP activities. So we wanted to share a little bit about what's next. Next slide, please. So where we are headed, this is a graphic that's gotten a little busier, but you may remember back in 2019 when we kicked off some of these discussions leading up to sort of an interim update of some of our IRP planning criteria. We talked about how Sigma and other planning activities integrate with the integrated resources plan. So now you'll see on the left, we've made some progress here. We did in the last few years finish a major 5-year update to our urban water management plan. We also provided or completed a major update to our Sigma alternative update based on what we're doing now. And all of that information is feeding into this integrated resources plan update that we're going to be targeting to complete in 2025. And that's a major initiative. As you know, we're going to be having a lot of discussions in coming months on this. But what we wanted to put in perspective is that a lot then still follows that effort. So following that, we have in the 2026-2027 timeframe, we'll have yet another update to our urban water management plan, and then another 5-year update to our Sigma alternative. So this is kind of a continuous cycle of planning activities going on with the IRP at the center here right now. And then on the bottom right in purple, you'll see we have a note here that the IRP also will feed into additional district planning efforts, be that the engineering report or other emergency planning and different things. There's a lot of things that are all tied here together. So we wanted to just put that in perspective, the larger picture roadmap on where we're headed in the next several years. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for our last presenter, Thomas Nizer, our water supply and planning manager, to share what to expect next and another fun topic that we'll cover.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Just dawned on me that we should probably consider 2026 the beginning of the next 30 years of potentially an aggressive new implementation to plan depending on how enterprising this board chooses to be over the next 2 years. As we recall, we are initiating the IRP update. We're calling our water resources master plan using the generic term right now. And then we recommended a 2-phased approach. And that phase 1 is the coming year ahead of us, 12-month period roughly. We have begun the consultant selection. The RFP for that is closed. We've had a couple of very good proposals. We're in the process of reviewing those. And I believe at this point, we're looking at late April for a decision on that, given the process. We were doing a very rigorous interview process, given the intimacy of the relationship we'll have with this consultant, working closely with the board and the community. But once we complete that, the intention is to begin immediately. So recall that process is going to be very heavy public engagement, development of stakeholder groups, working with the board and bringing that public information to help inform the board in establishment of goals and objectives for the next master plan update. There will be multiple board touch points on this. So we have scheduled workshops, intentional workshops for the board to work with the project team on development of a new plan, but we'll likely be utilizing pop-in opportunities at regularly scheduled board meetings as well. So it will be a steady drumbeat with a couple of deep hit notes in the middle there. Next slide, please. So we thought we'd just use the closing slides here to maybe touch on one subject, and that is the idea of, does the board want to consider change up of the name? We mentioned this at the fall workshop where we did an overview and background and history of water supply planning and the different philosophies, of which integrated resources planning is one, which in 1995 was a very progressive approach that this district implemented, in large part because this district was already doing integrated planning. It just sort of formalized the approach. So the name 1995 IRP, Integrated Resources Plan, was an embracing of a philosophy of how one does planning. At the time, it was ahead of the time. But we've since seen it become somewhat the gold standard of planning. And if you look around the state, I'm not going to call out agencies, but you see more and more agencies inserting the word integrated in their planning, but their diversification and the sort of balance of different supplies is very far from what this district does. And I do think that ACWD is remains a poster child for integrated planning. So we just wanted to throw it out there. We were leaving it to the board to come up with a bold new title to establish the next 30 years, or to perhaps lean on, proudly lean on the legacy of the district's past planning efforts and stick with the new name, Integrated Resources Plan. And thought Director Sethi's not here, and we don't necessarily need to make a decision, but we wanted to kind of germinate the seed a little bit. And be curious if there's any thoughts on direction for naming. Not at this time.
Plan is a plan.
Yeah. But I will
Whatever name
agree.
you want to call it.
I will agree. You see a whole lot more of IRP being used all over the place.
Sure do.
Kind of ask me the question is, you mean you don't do that already?
Part of my frustration is I thought the integrated water resources plan led us down some astray on some areas that were not cost effective as we look for alternative water supplies. That we have the good fortune of having ample water and extraordinary capacity. A 90 MGD capacity and sales this last week of about 25 MGD. So we're well structured as far as from a capacity standpoint. And if you want to call it a water resource master plan, I have no difficulty with that.
I don't have a really strong preference. Well, I know you could call it the best integrated resource plan in California. I'll go for that. No, so no strong preference. It's the context and the content that matters. And
Yeah, kind of the same way. No strong feelings. It's more about the content as well. So
I'm good with we could just leave it right where it is. It served a good purpose. It's a document where we could put stuff that, 15 years out, 20 years out, we're going to do it, maybe. And then 15 years out, 20 years out, we've looked at it and we're looking at it for another 20 years out. It's there. It's been identified. It shows that we've thought about it, but it didn't pan out yet. And that's very useful sometimes when you're dealing with other government agencies, when they're asking you, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing this? We say, well, we've looked at it, it's here. We think 15 years from now, we might be doing it. And I could think of one topic that I've seen in our IRP for probably still 20, maybe it's 20 years out now. The first time I think I saw it, it was 15 years out. And I'm perfectly satisfied with that answer. And what you've done with that one topic that I think we all know about.
I won't guess.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we
That's
just we'll stick with 2025 plan for the time being. We want to try and shorten things up and a lot of work coming up. And we'll reserve the right to give it a most awesome name 2 years down the road. How about that?
Maybe the most awesome integrated resources plan.
See, waiting for the magic to happen like that.
The one thing about the title, what is the target date for the, what is the span of time for this water resources master plan?
Well, so this is something we touched on in the fall as well. That was one thing to be determined by the board. I personally have a forming recommendation that's coming out of the CAP, that the climate adaptation plan, which had identified specific vulnerabilities in our water supply portfolio that will be accelerating beyond 2050. So I have a forming opinion that I've communicated to the board that looks like a good period out to which we should be considering. There are plans that extend 50 years, but our crystal ball is only so clear. And with 2025 having a demarcation in climate impacts on our existing portfolio, you know, that was the recommendation that I see forming out of that adaptation study. So I think about a 25, 30-year time span again sounds appropriate, but it's really going to be for the board to decide when board's going to get its arms around the problems it wants to tackle and the objectives it sets to measure success and to give direction. And some things will be more conducive for a longer time. Some may not.
My experience has been that people use the target date. So a 2050 water resources master plan.
Oh, for a name.
Might be
Okay.
a more understandable term.
Great. Well, that was a brief item. Any other questions on this topic?
It's on name, but let's keep going.
Uh-oh. Some names I think are being brainstormed.
Police Director Akbari has a wonderful
Strategic
name.
Water Asset Master Plan, also known as the swamp. Trying to get creative.
Right. Thanks.
I do have some questions on items to be addressed in the water resources master plan, but will there be a time for to raise those questions?
This will be a process that the board will be involved in, as Thomas points out, for 12 months or so. But I would say if there are things that are on your mind, it's probably best to get them out there.
Okay, let me throw two out. Cross my grenades. First is I would hope that we have, as you mentioned, reliability or contingency planning. Or you talked earlier that if we were to lose one of our major water supplies for 6 months or more. So this would also be to how to handle the contingencies. To that end, I would hope that we would take a good hard look at a Niles Canyon aqueduct and eventually get the hell out of Alameda Creek and put our water into pipelines, not open conveyance channels. Next, we've had our study on recycled water. I would hope that we not include recycled water in the master plan because we've shown it not to be an economically feasible alternative for the foreseeable future, and particularly within the 25 years of this plan. And there are also some potential environmental impacts that are yet to be quantified and identified. Thank you.
I guess I'm just going to jump in and saying, and unfortunately, Thomas, you have a director that feels strongly that recycled water should be in there and be evaluated to look at different alternatives, improvement in technology, and cost benefit analysis, for lack of better words. Right. I will never support the project that's not cost effective for the district, but that does not mean we should not look at it.
I would note we just ran that study at $6,000 to $8,000 per acre foot for indirect potable reuse. Indirect potable use should be even higher. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we all know what the subject was that I said was in our 15-year IRP a few years ago and remains there 15 more years out. And obviously then my position is, well, I think we should keep it in there and study it. Now, one thing we haven't done is tried to implement it because it didn't cost out. Now, will it cost out 25 years from now, 15 years from now? Maybe not. But that'll be up to the next board to decide, not us.
Let me bring up another issue, a threat that's come out, including recycled water in the plan. There was a lawsuit where people were being forced into doing recycled water because it was available. The legislative change may well require, if it's in your plan, require that you do it regardless of the cost, because of the desire not to have the growth-inducing desalination in their mind, in the mind of some people.
Well,
So I think we run the risk of being forced to do a really bad decision if we keep it in the plan.
I would enjoy that fight with the state legislature if they ever tried to do that. This is in our plan. This is what plans are for, is to try to figure out what you're going to do. If they're going to mandate stuff that's in our plan 25 years out, then there's a serious problem with that.
Well, preventing
And,
you from doing.
you know, I'm
doing
just
that
warning
first
our
before you
lawyer.
do the more realistic plans, and that is in the Democratic Party platform, unfortunately.
Well, I have a lot of issues right now with the Democratic Party platform. Obviously, this is not the meeting for that, but I'm saying that should be in our plan because something may change. It's like solar. We've been doing solar projects. My first solar project was in 1980. I don't even know. Some people may not have been alive in the room. So there are things that have changed in solar. There are things that haven't changed in solar. One of which was, I don't think they've done a whole lot of efficiencies of the panel themselves. What they have done though is the controllers have become incredibly better. The battery systems are better. Things change. And we have to have that in there. We should have it in there. It's an option. We don't need to do it at the moment. It hasn't panned out monetary wise. Why do we know that? Because we've studied it. And we could tell them, this is what our numbers are. This is why it doesn't pencil out. As you said, 6,000 acre feet or $6,000 an acre foot. I don't know what the exact number is. I just know that we've looked at it. We've analyzed those numbers and we've said, right now, it doesn't pan out. We do desal. We've water banked. I mean, nobody could question, or AMI, nobody could question what this district does for looking, where can we be efficient? How do we address our water? We just don't rely on one thing. And we're constantly out there looking. And this has been in our plan, along with some of those other things, for a very long time. And I'd like to keep it there. So I think we're up to at least 2. I don't know what Director Sethi feels, but I'm sorry, I disagree with you on that. I think we should keep it in there. I am saying I agree with you that it's not one of our high priorities at the moment.
It would be interesting to do a business case review of the AMI, which is approaching $1,000 per customer, and to determine what the net benefit is for particularly the smaller residential customers. Does it amount to almost $1,000?
We'll find out.
Sure. Well, maybe I could get my arms around this a little bit. Thanks for the input. I won't say there's any new revelations here, but what I hope that we can go into this process as any good long-range plan should approach, which is to be completely open-minded and to neither be for or against concepts, but to really consider the universe of feasible alternatives and let the objectives and the goals established by the board drive the recommendations. And not try to shape it too much ahead of time. And so I think that's going to be really important for us to do, maybe on this topic, but on all other topics as well. So if we could leave with that note, I would just like to reinforce that. And I know we're going to do that.
That's fair. Thank you.
I concur with that.
Cheers.
Great. Well, thank you. That is all the presentation material we have tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and cover some of these topics to set the stage for future workshops. We're happy to answer any other questions, but I think other than that, we will wrap up.
And it might just be another quick opportunity to check in and see if we have any members of the public that would like to comment or ask any questions. And I'm not
I
seeing
don't
any.
see any.
Now's your chance.
Well, I'd almost bad if I did.
Oh, okay, all right.
Very quick. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. But you folks at ACWD are doing. Wanted to briefly mention with regard to the water use. I give Stephanie a lot of credit. Here at Bosco, we represent but 25 others and in the room when ACWD is present and hear the hard work that you as a larger are doing. Kind of grow from that and allow some of our smaller agencies learn from you. I would say that your gallon per capita per day number is quite low. You know, we have other agencies on the other side of the bay on the peninsula who I'd say they dwarf you from a GPC basis, but collectively, not the number recently. We as a region are at 59 gallon per capita per day. So that's all of our agencies. That's the years of commendable. We're so much lower than that. So as we continue to speak through Aqua and voice Davis, they kind of fine tune the rules. What we're trying to do at Boston, whatever is put in place is frankly.
None of you and none of our agencies want to be faced with, dealing with fines or whatever the state could come down with. So that's still a work in process at the state level to see what ultimately the rules will be that you're getting. But anyway, I really am looking forward to sort of following the work that your team and that Laura and Ed are doing relative to your future plans. And I want to see our other Bosca agencies do similar. So that's one of the things I'm here today to do is again, pay attention to what you're doing and encourage some of our other agencies to do the same. So that was all.
If I could add one more quick request to the staff. It's possible to have going back 15, 20 years, what our water sales have been in each year in volume and dollar amount on an annual basis. We do a 5-year financial plan based on our water sales. And it'd be interesting to see how accurate we have been in our, how even that is. Second, I'd note that we've had extraordinary success in our conservation efforts, up to 13% in recent years. Would appear that a little over 1% of that could be attributed to the programs we just identified and quantified. So the real advantage is the extraordinary support we have from the community. When we ask them to stop using water, they stop using it. And then later when we take those restrictions, we use the word term mandatory, but we've never had to have an enforcement action in each of the last 2 droughts. So we have universal support of the community, and the value of communicating that is, I think, by far and away your best return, an extraordinary return. So thank you.
Director Weed, if I might, we do have historical information on water sales and revenues in our annual financial reports. And so I think staff, we could easily put together a 20-year history on that for you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, that's all staff has on item 4, the workshop.
Moving on then, item number 5.
Item 5, general manager's reports. Just a couple of quick items, just as a heads up. The board took action on Tuesday to rescind our drought surcharges. We released a press release immediately thereafter. Quick heads up, the Patch has picked it up. The East Bay Echo picked it up and wrote a nice article. The Aqua News, we're famous. We made the big time. And CBS locally in San Francisco picked that press release up too. So I'll be shooting an email to the board with all of those in there just so you can kind of see them in one place. after quickly double checking that we haven't seen anything else since this meeting started. There'll be other outlets putting out some information. The Fremont Connection e-newsletter will go out tomorrow, and Tri-City Voice will go out on the 28th with that information in there. And of course, we've updated our other sources of information, website and social and so forth too. So I'll send out some more information shortly. And then just quickly, in terms of some late breaking news on the Hetch Hetchy system and some operational adjustments they're making. Just a quick heads up on that from Mr. Aaron's with an update.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Yeah, I just wanted to provide the board with a quick update on San Francisco PUC's Hetch Hetchy project and their current shutdown. As I mentioned previously at board meetings, they've been shutting down the Hetch Hetchy system for their Mountain Tunnel project, which is really, based on trying to improve reliability of their overall system. So we work with them to accommodate their shutdowns. They go to their local supplies during that shutdown. That's why we've seen, harder deliveries coming from the blender and other impacts. In addition to water quality, though, it also impacts somewhat our operations, but our facility operations. We plan annual shutdowns of treatment plant number 2 in order to do preventive maintenance. And we try to stagger our shutdown with their shutdown. So we don't like to have our treatment plant offline while they're on local supplies, just in case they have issues at their treatment plants or things don't work out just right. They were originally planned to go offline and go to local supplies in January. But if you remember when this started, they were delayed in switching to local supplies because of the storms. Because of local water quality, they weren't comfortable going to local supplies because of all the rain and turbidity in their system. So they delayed their initial shutdown. Now they're delaying. They were supposed to come back to Hetch Hetchy at the end of the month on March 29th. We were just notified yesterday that they're going to extend their shutdown for at least 2 more weeks to the 12th of April. Now it's to really take advantage of local supplies because they have got a lot of local supply and potentially spilling in some of the reservoirs. They want to continue to take advantage of some of that supply. So we're looking at our schedule for our shutdown, and that's going to make us push back our treatment plant shutdown and likely shorten that shutdown. So we're kind of coordinating with them on when they anticipate coming back to Hetch Hetchy. They've indicated that extension or that shutdown could be extended, especially if it continues raining into April. They might look at extending it even further. So we'll be coordinating our schedule, likely resulting in a shorter shutdown at TP2, as well as continuing, as long as they're on local supplies, we'll continue seeing a little bit harder water or hardness levels in the distribution system. And we'll continue to monitor it, and I'll let you know if there's any major developments. But as of now, they're scheduled to go back to Hetch Hetchy on March 12th. And then we'll be shutting down TP2 shortly after that for probably about 3 weeks. That's all I have to report. If you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, I believe we're then into director comments. Director comments, reports, item, agenda request.
Not at this time. Thank you.
Nothing for me?
None from my end.
And thank the staff for the reports that you presented tonight.
Thank you. I do apologize. I've had some stuff going on at work today. Kind of caused a little hiccups.
We all know about stuff going on at work too. So we can sympathize.
I sympathize with last minute directives being handed down by higher authorities.
All right, ready to adjourn?
I am ready to adjourn. With that, then I guess we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.
6:11 p.m.